Today we're going to discuss therapeutic education and anxiety and stress in university. We started to discuss stress and learning before, and today mostly concentrate on what is therapeutic education. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about my interest in this topic, precisely the role of negative effects in therapeutic education. So I will start with a slide that you already saw, how Philippe Rieff defines what is a therapeutic society. So I assume, and he suggested that we're going to live in a therapeutic society, that is society that is psychologized. Precisely every aspect of it is psychologized, including education. But mostly we ourselves as individuals, our relationship with each other, romantic relationship, professional relationship, and here we can include naturally relationship between teachers and students, and relationship between students. So all the scope of human relationship is psychologized, and naturally university is a part of this process. And just to remind you what he meant, he claimed that therapeutic society is something that comes to substitute moral society or religious society. He also claims that psychology is a natural or easy substitution for religion, for the role of religion that it played before society started to be psychologized. This basically means that a therapeutic approach that each of us perceive themselves as a potential client of psychotherapy, and we refer to psychology because it's this dominant discourse by default. We refer to it as the authority that knows what proper human relationship is supposed to look like, or how do we supposed to feel like, what is healthy human, what is healthy relationship. Even the fact that we ask in this question and that those questions bother us, it's already a sign that Rieff was right, that we do live in a therapeutic society which is psychologized. So each of us are this psychologized men, some of us are women, but both are psychological. And Rieff is quite conservative thinker, and by his mood, one can judge that he would prefer to come back to this moral society where we didn't bother that much about how we feel, but when we were capable of doing some great deeds, when we're bothering, it bothered us more if we are ethical, if we are moral, or if what we do makes sense from point of view of morality. So religious and moral perspective for him feels like something probably we need to come back to. That's this problem with his critique of psychological society or therapeutic society. And the other thing that he distinguishes it, if before religious man or this moral man was born to be saved, so the idea was to save the soul, to be moral, to get rid of, to clean yourself from sins, and that was seen as a goal of life, as a meaning of life, probably. And current psychological human is born to be pleased. So, according to Rieff critiques, they care about themselves. We do care about our internal feeling, and if there is some problem, some serious problem we need to engage to. If we suffer internally, we don't care that much if this suffering has a meaning. We care about how we feel, and we rush to a psychotherapy to just cure this feeling, to feel normal again. This is why he doesn't like psychological humans. And current, more or less current version of Rieff critique, not exactly his critique, because his critique was conservative, and Barbara Ehrenreich is not conservative, but there is this tradition which functions now that originates from Rieff and some other thinkers, to criticize this positively oriented psychology and society. Precisely, she claims that in this work, something similar to Reef laments that why do we care about how do we feel? Why does it bother us so much? Why do we work on ourselves? Well, while there's so many things to be done, while we can be engaged in a real solidarity, in real cooperations with others. She also mentions this gulag, the way Alenka Zupancic, I told you, defines it. The gulag, when we have this moral ideal, psychological ideal, which comes to substitute moral ideals, that we need to feel good. And this actually works sometimes in a different direction. Instead of actually feeling good, we start to feel even worse. So if, for example, if some inevitable suffering occurs in our life, like cancer, and there is this demand that humans, healthy humans, psychologically healthy humans, need to be happy, it kind of doubles the load of a disaster that is happening to you. She also asks, she also claims, she notices that there is this problem that of stigmatization of people who are negative, so-called negative people, which comes in with which is the other side of over-evaluation of positive mood. If we presume that positive thinking and happiness, positive attitude are healthy attitude, and it's in our hands to become happy, and it's something wrong with us if we aren't happy, then kind of the other side of it is stigmatization of those negative people. And as a result, we'll have to eliminate them from our life. So there's this, all the negative processes, all the processes that come together, that this psychologization of society and the therapeutical turn, the way Reef calls it, all the byproducts that it brings. And precisely what interesting for me is that it's opposes to solidarity, and it opposes to something human that maybe otherwise would be saved if it's not for the therapeutical turn, or if it would be different therapeutical turn. And the idea, Reef idea of therapeutical, this perspective of analysis of therapeutical society was used to analyze university, to analyze current education. For example, Rice already claimed that more or less was in tune with Reef. He claimed that modern education is therapeutic, because university is a part of society and society is therapeutic, therefore university is therapeutic too. And he mentions here that he doesn't approve that instead of transferring knowledge, instead of playing function that university has to play, forming individual and making them great and better, university just turned into the group therapy, where we care more how students feel, how about the emotional intelligence, and not so much about the transfer of knowledge. So his lament here is that university and education, because of this therapeutic turn, because it turned into therapeutic education, doesn't play the traditional role it used to play. And maybe in this way, understood in traditional way, it's kind of useless now because of this turn. He also, there are other negative sides that he mentions here, in tune with Reef, that it turns us into those potential clients of psychotherapy. We treat ourselves as a patient, and it develops a culture of victimhood and narcissistic culture, that what bothers us is how we feel, what bothers us is ourselves, and it doesn't allow the other kind of human relationship to be to appear. For him, it doesn't allow the hierarchy, so he's also, we'll talk about it, he's also kind of, there is a conservative mood in this, or nostalgic mood to go in somewhere where there is this hierarchy of transferring knowledge from someone who is more wise and to someone who is less wise. But some of the features that he mentions are actually are problematic. For example, the idea that it prevents them from building some kind of relationship with other people, even if it's probably true, even though it's not hierarchical relationship that therapeutical turn prevents from forming, but it's the relationship where we don't treat the other as someone who is bad for our psychological health. So in contemporary education, there is this, maybe not in Russia, but there is this demand from teachers to be also psychotherapists, to play a role of psychotherapists and to care about student mental health, precisely considering the content of the knowledge they deliver and considering the way they behave. And we know that we do treat as dangerous for us someone who who act in a way that they don't care about our mental health. We would naturally demand them to start doing it because we are psychological. So Rice doesn't like it, same as Reef didn't like it. They do have this mood of going back somewhere where education proper used to exist and where proper classical transferring of knowledge did exist and education makes sense. The other book, more recent book, is Ecclestone and Hayes, The Dangerous Rise of Therapeutic Education. They also similarly claim that what now started to be a key element of education used to be just a byproduct of it, and now basically this byproduct, the care of psychological health, started to be the central one, while it hinders the main, according to them, the main goal of knowledge, that is the transfer and forming moral individual, transference of knowledge, and forming of narcissistic, which causes formation of narcissistic students, and it prevents the feeling of dignity of a human being. So it is moral, both of the cases of those scholars who try to use Reef critique of therapeutic society and use it for the critique of university. They both have this moralistic laments and nostalgic feelings about what was lost in education, presuming that education before was better than now. The other thing we can mention is Foucault, pastoral power. You also already saw this slide. So from Foucault's concept of pastoral power is also used to criticize contemporary education. Pastoral power, that you remember, something that resembles Christian power. It's his concept that is used to describe contemporary functioning of power apparatus. He claims that it's democratic, it's not sovereign power anymore, but still it still preserves oppression, and maybe it allows, because of this democratic form of functioning, it allows this oppression to be even more effective, because when there was a sovereign, it was a more obvious oppression. And there is a king, king has a will, and this will has to be implemented. It's clearly oppression. But with a pastoral power, like Christian power of a pastor, through which power functions now in democratic society, power is implemented under the pretext of care, and it's more, it's easier to accept this kind of care, because we do want, this is what we want, the care to be practiced upon us, right? And by allowing pastor pastoral power to take care of us, the other side of this, that we allow this pastoral care to define us. So, for example, one of the examples of those figures of pastors are psychoanalysts, or just different types of experts, health experts, psychological health experts like psychologists, or just medical workers who are instance of knowledge. What is the human being? What is the healthy human being? What is the healthy psyche? And this is someone who we turn to for care, who we turn to for help. And it's not oppressive. It's not that they are oppressing us. It just happens so that it organized in such a way that this power functions through this kind of care. It used to be in Christianity, say similar to Reef insights, that in Christianity the main thing that defined human life was care for soul, which is more moral type of leading your life, when you care if what you do is moral, if you care if what you do is sinful or not sinful. It turned gradually into care for psychological health, and I showed you before that there are a lot of similarities between those two. Precisely this, we're still waiting for Messiah. We still need someone to tell us what is health, what is the salvation. We need someone to lead us to salvation, even though salvation is not after the earthly life, but the salvation will come. Might come in this life in the form of psychological health, happiness, and well-being. And there are those people who know how to transform. We assume there are those Messiah's experts, pastors who know how to transform our lives into this heaven, and they know what is heaven. They know what our life has to be transformed into, and this is how they basically, not that they gain power, just they articulate power through this very structure of society. And as I said, they're not evil. They suffer even more sometimes from this, from the structure they're enclosed into, because they're also human. They also suffer, and they also exist even under the greater pressure of ideal of happiness and well-being, because they're experts. They kind of, it is assumed that they're supposed to be happy and positive, optimistic, and will have like high esteem or something. And if they don't, accordingly, they also suffer even more because of that. According to Foucault, pastor used to guide to salvation, but at the same time, like it is now, but at the same time, the other side of it, that it prescribes what is salvation, it prescribes law, and it teaches the truth. So if you talk about education, there are a couple of attempts to use a Foucault concept of pastoral power in relation to critique of education. And for example, in this paper, what is called innovative modern learning environment, it's like modern type of educational model. It is criticized as precisely, it's as nothing new. It's something that repeats the old way of implementation of power, the old pastoral way of teaching. And so behind this teacher who is innovative and taking care of us, of our mental health, we still might notice the old figure of a pastor who is taking care of our soul. And at the same time, by taking care, it kind of leads us, informs certain type of subject that is presumed supposed to be the end of a teaching learning process. And also interesting how the very classes are organized, because in disciplinary power and in biopower, for Foucault, what matters is very structure of a classroom. And when we talk about this education, the novel types of education where children at school, because this is about school, and students at university can work in the innovative spaces with like choosing their way of learning and in cooperating with each other. So it might be the same switch, unfortunately, from it just doesn't look oppressive anymore, but it might be, even because of this, even more oppressive, because at the same time it might only look as liberation, but at the same time you still have, there is still certain requirements that you have to pass, and there is still certain requirements what have to be formed out of you, but this impression is so that it's about your own choice. Yeah, this is done in order to take care of you, something like that. It's even and start to be even more attractive. So similar difference between sovereign, who is oppressive figure, who is dictating his law, and it's obviously that he is oppressive. But at the same time, figure of pastor is even more oppressive because it does the same thing under the pretext of care, and we actually even demand this care from him. But he implicitly, and it's attractive, there is no visible oppression, but paradoxically, this oppression might, through this liberation, might function even better because it's your choice and you're now demanding it. So traditional education was medieval universities, as you know, and university as such, have religious roots. Universities of 12th century were created on a basis of church schools, and they initially offered spiritual educations, religion education. So it functions, its structure was very similar to contemporary structure, but it was not secular yet. And later, the development, the progress of university, it is associated with secularization, but the problem is if it's originally structured and formed, but there's lots of things that are similar today to how it functions before. The problem is if this structure is suitable for this new kind of secular religion, if the structure itself doesn't suggest or kind of forms space and the process in such a way that it still contains those features of religious education. So if the traditional education cared about knowledge transfer, it was the main one of the main aspects, especially for more secularized universities and education, but also installation of moral values and religious dogmas. In medieval classroom, we see that nothing happens. For example, with SAS class with me, I'm still standing, right? There is still this hierarchy represented, that the teacher transfers knowledge to students who don't have this knowledge, and students demand this knowledge. There is still higher hierarchical structure preserved even on the level of very framework of organization. But the change is within the therapeutic turn. The change is from intellectual development is still preserved. It's broader, a bit broader now, not a bit, but significantly broader. It's not just knowledge transfer, because it used to be, we now live after time or at the time of liquid modernity or postmodernism, we might call it. We don't believe in certain absolute truths that someone knows this truth and can transfer it. But we still think that, we still believe in intellectual development. We still think that there are people who can lead us in this direction. But the other important element now is holistic development, which includes psychological well-being. When we start to care about how students feel, when students themselves start to care and demand how they feel psychologically. There is emphasis of development of emotional intelligence and social skills. And so learning is not only it's not only transfer of knowledge now. Learning is defined in a much larger content. And Reef and those critics of therapeutic education who take his idea, base their ideas on Reef, they don't like this second element. They think that the second element is something that doesn't let the main element of knowledge transfer to be fully accomplished, that instead of within the therapeutic turn that modern education just went through, it's the main thing that defines education for them. Knowledge transfer start to be problematic and start to be perceived as secondary in relation to this holistic therapeutic approach. So teacher transformed from the teacher to psychotherapy who just bothers where how students feel and if they have soft skills, and instead of actually taking care of if they have proper knowledge and developed intellectually. The other thing is that when we talk about therapeutic turn, although Reef initially and Foucault, they criticized, they use even Foucault uses as a figure of Pastoral psychoanalyst. But now, what mostly define therapeutic turn are humanistic and positive psychology, because this is a conventional psychology. When we talk about psychology, those are current conventional research, current conventional approach in psychology. And pop psychology, accordingly, it's also based on humanistic and positive psychology. And those approaches would be associated with names of Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, and Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman is the one who is the father of positive psychology. And the defining feature of them is that they promote individual well-being and self-actualization, and especially positive psychology is it makes this emphasis on happiness, well-being, and positivity. Everything positive, and the other side of it is stigmatization of negative. And we even, for us, we don't notice how questionable this formulation is individual well-being. Like it goes for us something we got used to, something we don't question anymore. But why is this individual? Why do we care about individual that much? And you'll later discuss it as problematic, this part of concentration on particular individual, on the inner world of a person. This would introduce humanistic philosophy, humanistic psychology, not philosophy. And positive psychology would be more responsible for the emphasis on happiness and equalization of happiness and psychological health. So, critical theory. If we think about education from the lens of critical theory, it's closer to Foucault, because Foucault, even though they share with Rice who introduced the concept of a therapeutic turn, if Foucault critique of pastoral power and Rice critique of therapeutic turn, even if they share some ideas, they both see the problematized the psychology of Foucault, problematized the larger scope of medicalization. Even if there are similarities, there are great difference between them, because Foucault is not conservative. So if, or not that conservative, maybe someone might claim bravely that Foucault is conservative to a certain extent, but with Reef, it's more obvious. He has this nostalgic idea that, and he criticizes this new trend for his time of psychologization as a degradation, that something went wrong. And he really laments that it shouldn't be that way. It should be probably it should go the right way, which he would consider progress or development. Otherwise, what was happening, according to him, is the regressive trend. But Foucault, even if his some thoughts, some critiques are similar to Reeve, he actually does it with a different approach and with a different goal. It's the goal to show that current trends, even in democratic society, they still have this repressive, oppressive element in them. So whatever he described is not because he wants to go back to sovereign power, for example, but because he precisely shows that it's not perfect yet. It's not as perfect that we might think it is, that it's still just a more pleasant way to articulate oppressiveness. And maybe it actually helps this oppressiveness itself. So the critique of therapeutic turn and critique of therapeutic turn in university can be divided on two trends: less progressive and more progressive. And those Rice and Reeve, who criticized more conservative philosophers, might be considered part of a separate conservative critique, but more progressive critique would be Foucault's critique and critique of critical theory of society and of education as such, of university. Critical theory is a critical approach to society that tries to figure out what injustice exists and ways how to fix the injustice. Theodor Adorno and Marcuse belong to Frankfurt School, and it's their critique that will mostly engage today. So they didn't like conventional psychology. They criticize precisely what they call conformist psychology. Precisely this critique can be addressed to the humanistic psychology and especially to positive psychology. And something that we perceive now as good, unquestionably good, and maybe useful, not maybe, but is useful. So they do criticize it for as something that belongs to capitalism, as something that sustains capitalism. They do criticize, as critical theorists, they criticize concentration on individual. That conventional conformist psychology, they concentrate individuals on themselves, and by this they prevent real solidarity and revolution even. So according to Adorno, psychotherapy, he didn't like psychotherapy, he didn't even like, so Frankfurt School, critical theory, they like psychoanalysis more, but even only the theoretical part. They don't like the practice of psychoanalysis, and the other kinds of psychotherapy they don't like. They think they're fraud. Adorno thinks that all the psychotherapies are fraud because they're trying to adjust or adapt a human to a mad whole, and by this a cured individual becomes actually really sick. So by concentrating on our own mental states, on our own feelings, and this is what this orientation is something that conventional conformist psychology imposes on us. We kind of contribute to the capitalist unjust society without seeing it as problematic. So, for example, if we exist within patriarchal society or within other kind of other types of unjust society, instead of noticing that our problem and our suffering is caused by this very injustice, but some problems within the society, by sickness of society, Conventional conformist psychology would claim that there is something wrong with us. It will internalize our suffering, that it will claim that there are certain methods how to adapt to this society and how to be happy within the society. And by this, it just redirects our negative feelings that otherwise could be directed to it could be directed in order to change the social order, to work with injustice of society, to heal society as such. And instead, it just reorients them in a safe way within ourselves, and by this adjusting us to this sick society, and society stays sick, and we kind of adjusting to them. So society, and it stays sick and it stays sane, and we are working each on ourselves. Plus, according to them, Adorno, there is also this element of exploitation of suffering person. Person is suffering because of the unjust order, plus person is exploited because they have to pay money to the frauds who are psychotherapists. So this is the problematic thing. And so by internalizing this problem, and by claiming that it's our fault, by giving us impression that it's our fault and there is something we can do to change our attitude, to stay positive, claiming that it's our fault, there is something we can do with it, plus we have to pay money for it. Positive psychology, not positive psychology, but conventional psychology, which is embodied in positive psychology, to my view, most explicitly. It basically contributes to preservation of injustice and preservation of different kind of sicknesses that society suffers from. Or it can be also unjust work conditions, and instead of accumulating these negative feelings that needed maybe collective feelings that can be shared, and as a result redirected into the possible change of this unjust order. Conventional psychology, and now it's fashionable to have a psychologist at the corporation who will try to help you to become a productive worker by taking care of you. But so that the company itself within unjust conditions of work won't be questioned. They are even ready to pay for you not to question it. So this is the critique. Marcuse also talks, and they don't like psychoanalytic practice. They consider it also kind of a fraud, but they do see critical potential of Freud theory of psychoanalysis, and theory as such here is so it's practice of collective practice of critique. And this is the aim of critical theory, to develop this collective practice of critical consciousness. Marcuse writes about the triumph of happy consciousness, that happy consciousness for him is a sleeping consciousness. So this injunction to be happy. And nothing else, and that's the goal of injunction. The idea that this is the goal of your life, and there are psychotherapists who can help you with that, and doesn't allow to see anything beyond it. Unjust order that has to be changed, for example, and they call it happy consciousness, and the goal is to awaken the happy consciousness, meaning to transform it into an unhappy consciousness for a while. The consciousness that allows itself to be critical, to recognize that something is wrong, and on the basis of it actually act upon this recognition. And it also prevents from recognizing this content, and it prevents from recognizing prevents the adequate negative feelings that we might have as a reaction, as an adequate reaction to unjust order. So if we see injustice, in society is unjust, natural adequate thing is to react with negative effects. And psychology conventional psychology would claim that this is your own fault, you need to go through anger management or something like that. So it stigmatizes those negative effects, and it also suggests a cure for it, and it suggests that it's your fault, you have them, and there is the process of forming psychological cure that you need to go through and turn into this satisfied, adapted individual. So by doing this, psychology adapts, conventional psychology adapts you to the sick society, and society stays sick. And we do surrender to injustice with our happy consciousness. And psychological apparatus, therefore, so it's not the main object of critique of critical theory, but it's still a very crucial object of critique because since our society is psychologized, and after this therapeutic turn, apparatus of psychotherapy turned into one of the most basic ways to sustain unjust order, and the largest apparatus how to adjust people to the existing order. So it plays, even though it might look not dangerous and good, very good, but it has this problematic aspect to it, and this problematic aspect might be actually very important. And by adjusting us adjusting us to unjust order, it also inhibits the development of critical social consciousness, and inhibits formation of real solidarity, because it forms those narcissistic individuals, obedient citizens and productive workers. It also forms or sustains the idea that each of the individual is a rival to another, and it sustains the order where we compete with each other, and the ideal of competitive individualism, where the other individual is someone we have to compete with, we have to be better than them, which prevents formation of actual possible solidarity with those individuals. There is our psychotherapist. The psychotherapist is on our side, and self-help books are on our side, and on the other side is our rival, other individual who we need to be better than, which is, within this framework, it's hard to form any meaningful relationship with this individual who is on the other side. So it is a threat to mutual social support and values of solidarity. And this is why, because it doesn't let this solidarity to be formed and social consciousness to be formed. It just presumes that individualistic consciousness is the one that's supposed to be nurtured. Because of this, solidarity fails to be formed according to critical theory. Yeah, so this paper, Sarah Amster, she uses critical theory, Frankfurt School critical theory, to analyze contemporary education as a critique of contemporary way of education. And she presents the apparatus of education as functioning, after the therapeutic turn, as functioning in the same way as apparatus of psychotherapy. So it's actually preserved this status quo, the status where we don't question unjust order, we just internalize the feeling and redirect the negative feeling, inhibit the negative feeling, and university actually forms this satisfied subject who is adapted to the unjust order. And there's also culture of individual competitiveness that university installs, and it basically prepares the individual who will participate in the just society without questioning, being satisfied and being happy in the existing social circumstances. And by this, it prohibits the development of critical social consciousness. So we don't, because we are engaged into the competitive attitude towards other, and engage with ourselves. How do we feel if something traumatizes us, if other person traumatizes us, if we have negative feelings that we have to work through with our psychotherapist. It prevents us from seeing some larger problems that ourselves, prevents them from forming critical social consciousness, and prevents us from forming cooperation, solidarity with others. So what she suggests, instead of pedagogies of comfort, she calls it pedagogies of comfort, apparatus of education that functions in a similar way to conventional psychology, making us feel comfortable individually by adapting us to the existing unjust society. So she suggests that there is supposed to be pedagogies of discomfort. The idea that we have to, on the contrary, concentrate more so the basic idea of critical theory is to form, the ideal of education is to form critical education, obviously. Paulo Freire was the one who developed the concept of the pedagogy, of a critical pedagogy. He published it in 1968. It's still very popular and the main popular book in critical pedagogy. So what he did is he was discussing the process, pedagogical process, in terms of colonization and oppression, seeing teachers within the traditional framework of education as oppressors, and students as those who are oppressed. He also claimed that there are no neutral education. Either it functions as an instrument of conformity, of surrendering, of oppression, or as freedom. And obviously critical pedagogy is supposed to be a pedagogy of freedom. So he criticized this traditional structure, hierarchical structure, where students are seen as where students are oppressed and they are seen within this the banking approach. This is his concept. The banking meaning that oppressors, teachers as oppressors, use students as a piggy bank by putting knowledge in them, like in a passive storage object. And students, from this point of view, are perceived as passive recipient of those knowledge. And this is the colonization, and this is oppression. And critical pedagogy is supposed to be pedagogy that is aimed for something else. Basically, the installation, the collective formation of critical consciousness, cooperation, formation of solidarity, and everything that is opposite to oppression, that is liberalization. So, current trend to which I belong to is the idea that represented in Kathy Wright paper, for example, is that she claims that it is impossible, that we are psychological. There is nothing we can do with it. There is no way back, and it's kind of weird to claim that before it was better, because before there were more oppression and more, for example, patriarchy within the society, the moral traditional society, and we don't think that we she doesn't think, I think all of us don't think that we want to go back there, that it was better. But there is no way back. There is only maybe the way to modify the psychologization that happened now. And if psychology comes to substitute religion, and if it still retains some features of religion and is still oppressive in this way, it doesn't mean that it's worse than religion. It's not perfect. It's terrible even. But it's what was before the religion itself is even worse than that. So according to her, there is no way back, right? It's weird to claim, like Reef claims that, and like Rice claims, those who criticize therapeutic turn and those who criticize therapeutic turn in education. It's weird to claim that if now we have this dimensional psychologization added, if we care about emotional intelligence, if we care about soft skills and similar thing, it's claimed on the basis of it, it's claimed to think that it's regress. Because what is the progress from this perspective? Going back to the learning processes, to the educational framework where we didn't bother about it and just stop bothering about it. It's impossible. We are really formed in that way that it's important for us. We do think about ourselves through the lens of psychology, and it's might be in certain way at least better than thinking about ourselves in terms of sin and if we go into heaven and if someone is truthful Christian or really moral human. So it is like that, and it's going to stay probably that way for a while. So her claim is that if we are within therapeutic culture and we can't go anywhere outside of the self, and we obviously can't go back and we shouldn't go back, then considering the critique of a therapeutic education and of therapeutic society, maybe we can make form critical version of therapeutic education. So kind of combine critical education with therapeutic education, because there are ways where they coincide with each other, where they don't contradict with each other. For example, and it's not entirely bad, because in many respects, for example, development of emotional intelligence, it's also about the inclusions of other. It's also about understanding other, respecting other. And it's to a certain extent important, even to a great extent, important for formation of solidarity. It's not only emotional, it's not only those skills that help you to compete with others, comprehending them as rivals, which inhibits solidarity, but it's also about understanding, taking care of other, taking them seriously, and understanding yourself. So there are features that are compatible within the therapeutic education. There are features that are compatible with critical education. Therefore, we can perform like a critical turn within the therapeutic education, because therapeutic education is all we have right now. It's therapeutic society. So the idea is that we could just figure out what helps social justice and what helps equality out of all the scope of psychological inquiries that were formed within therapeutic education, and work on them, and work on those of them, preserve those of them that help critical education. Yeah, so it's necessary to identify and cultivate those aspects that would support social justice and equality agenda. And also, Sarah Amsler mentions that even we can find the therapeutical turn, even though Frankfurt School critical theorists, they would criticize conventional psychology for everything I told you, that it contributes to injustice by making accent on individual well-being. But at the same time, they might be seen as imposing a certain type of therapeutic education, because for Marcuse, for example, it is important to create a certain type of this pro-social sensibility that would help solidarity and that would be opposed in opposition to the egoistic mind of that psychology, conventional conformist psychology forms. So it also might be seen as partially therapeutic education. They're not conservative, they're opposites to conservative. And emotional aspect, this sensibility, pro-social sensibility, is something that plays important role in critical education as such, and promotes a sense of connectedness with others and inclusion of others, against in a contrast with concentration on ourselves and concentration on the competitiveness with others. And also within the concept of critical education as such, what for a year, for him, also emotional intelligence is important part. So there is also within this idea of liberation education through liberation, there is also important aspect of emotional ability to understand others and support others and care others, which presupposes that it's not only transference of knowledge or formation of knowledge and critique of social order, which is collective critique of social order. But this collectiveness, it also has the emotional aspect, it has psychological aspect, and it's something we need to learn. So the way out, maybe not perfect, might be to perform critical turn in therapeutic education, preserving therapeutic education since there is no way to go out of it, and to perform critical turn within it by preserving those features, this knowledge of human psychology that would contribute to the formation of more just order and of more profound collectivity and cooperation with each other. Yeah, those are some aspects that we can find in critical theory, in Frankfurt School thinkers, and that might be seen as features of this critical turn within still therapeutic education. That the idea for critical theory is obviously critical thinking, independent critical thinking, but it also requires a certain emotional component of understanding of others, who suffer from oppression, from injustice. So it's critical thinking. It's not thinking that it's concentrated on yourself. It also presupposes this sensibility to the problems of others who are oppressed. It's ideal of mutual support, cooperation, and inclusiveness. And it's awake of a happy consciousness from a sleep, meaning if consciousness is awake, it's not happy anymore, it's unhappy. It understands, it adequately reacts to unjust society with negative effects. Otherwise, being happy in a sick society is kind of an inadequate thing. And by installing this inadequate reaction, we preserve injustice in society. So when consciousness is awake, it starts to be unhappy. There is a problem in, I told you about it, in critical theory, that they still presuppose that those negative effects are only temporary. Then we need them as adequate reaction to unjust order, and then we'll be collectively happy. In my view, it won't happen. But negative effects are still very important. So there are trends that recognize need of inevitability, that anxiety is inevitable in society. Precisely, Ronald Barnett, in his work Will to Learn, being a student in an age of uncertainty, what he does, he's using existential framework and existential language to analyze university. And of course, for him, this being of a student as being of a human, is being where anxiety is inevitable. And even more so, with students, it's anxiety, they feel even more of that, precisely because they're students, precisely because it is demanded from a student to be individual, to form themselves as independent individuals. And for Heidegger, we remember that it takes anxiety, it takes admitting, feeling your anxiety. And if we come back to this modes of existence in Heidegger, inauthentic and authentic. So according to Barnett, this is the university is a process of transforming students from inauthentic human to authentic human, and it takes anxiety. Self-formation takes anxiety. So there is this recognition. Barnett is one of the examples of recognition that negative effects are inevitable. But Barnett's problem is that he is an educational thinker, and he does questions current university, and he does admit that it's kind of meaningless within a contemporary society, because we live in what is called liquid modernity, or what is called postmodernism, when we don't have those stable meanings, when we don't believe in final truths, and where therefore the university that precisely was formed as something that transferred the stable truths, it's meaningless. But he still finds using the existential framework, he still finds a new meaning, that it's a space of this formation of individual, and it takes anxiety. It takes that the student will admit and expose themselves to anxiety in order to form themselves as authentic subjects. But my problem was that, that it's still the delineation of humans who are worse and who are better, because they go to university and it goes through, they admit anxiety, and it's. This is what Heidegger implied. So it is, I like Barnett because he admits that we have anxiety and it will not go anywhere, it will get only worse. But the problem that he uses it to install the hierarchy between people. And he doesn't say so, but it's still, if you think about it, it suggests that teacher is a better human being, because I don't know why, because it's already authentic and subject as suggested. So it's still, it's not the discourse that I want, it's not the discourse of solidarity. There's this social, in existential philosophy, there's this lack of social dimension, except for Martin Buber, who pays attention to the social dimension, that we define each other. Well, the last lecture will be talking about the social dimension that needs to be added to all this, all of those perspectives. But this is my favorite quote. I show it in almost all of the lectures. So, my personal interest in this critical turn in therapeutic education, that an important aspect of it is emancipation and attention to negative effects like anxiety, even anger, sadness, that was kind of stigmatized by conventional conformist psychology. And this is more about psychoanalysis, which the critical theory might not like, but they don't like it that much as they hate conventional psychology. So Jacobi uses the term negative psychoanalysis, and he uses as a precisely practice of critical theory. So negative psychoanalysis is negative because it's doesn't succumb to the this chase of happiness that is imposed on us, but it actually plumbs in, it goes in those depths, recognizing it's unhappy consciousness, right? It's consciousness that is awakened, and it listens to the sound of sadness, and through those sound of sadness, it reveals the sound of, it reveals the opportunity of revolt. So the other quote that is appropriate here, showing to you the third time, but it's appropriate here because there is nothing we can use. There is no other substance except for anxiety and stress and all this, at least according to me, that we can use. That there is no other world like this happy world where we saved and be happy. That we can create in this life, because when we stigmatize and when we stigmatize those negative effects, and when we try to look for something else to work with, some other life to live, we kind of closing our eyes in relation to this life, right? And it also makes this very process makes problematic human solidarity and human cooperation. So for me, what I value in this, that I try to make accent on, is negative effects in therapeutic turn, in critical turn, in therapy, within the therapeutic turn, not only in education, but also in education. And also the accent on solidarity, because it might be even problematic, the very critical therapeutic turn, the way it is presented by critical theorists, it still it still functions in a similar way to what they criticize, like to what conventional psychology does. It still wants to form a certain type of subject. It is a subject, it's pro-social, but it's a subject that is pro-social, and there still functions in a way pastors function, even if they're against those. But if you notice, they know what kind of subject we need to form with those pro-social features. So they do function as pastors, and they do function as Messiah, who lead to better society, better human, better education. They kind of do what they themselves criticize, and there is still this attention, maybe not attention to individual. They do pay more attention to society, but it's still society that consists of individuals, pro-social individuals, and what I was trying to do, especially in the last lecture, I promise I'll do it, is to switch the perspective to very connectivity of people, not as a connection of separate individuals, but just this perspective have to be maybe thrown upside down and just concentrating on very connectivity with each other, instead of just discussing ourselves and how we connect to each other. Maybe this is an important move. Otherwise, I'm done.